folks? Let's wait for
No, I think we should go ahead and start. I'm not sure where Alicia is right now, so I don't want us to wait for her.
Cool. All right. Well, again, and we'll have it as recording, so you can share it with her that way. Also, Akila.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool. So I'm Andy Spieldenner. I'm presenting today with Vanessa Johnson, and we represent the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus. We met most of you in D.C. Barb Cardell from the caucus is also on the webinar attending, and Nana Khanna is doing tech support. So a little bit about, many of you know that this is part of the training to support the POP initiative that AIDS United gave you a grant to do. And part of what we're doing is building on the work that we started in DC, and that we'll continue to work with you individually with our sites, with each of the sites, as well as in the face-to-face meetings. So this webinar, basically, Nana has already said, the audio for the phone is probably clearer than your computers. If you want to get on your webcam like Clarence is, so that everyone can see you, go right ahead. Thanks, Clarence. So the people from the various sites, Allison Mondi is here from Seattle. Akila Benton and Clarence Peoples are from Detroit. January Leo, Benita Ray representing Houston. And January, I don't think I've seen you in years. So it's nice to see you, even if on webinar. So some tips, if you need to raise your hand, there's an option there under My Mood. So if you need to do anything, we are recording it, so feel free to use the chat to ask any questions. And if that's clear enough for folks, we can keep on going. So I wanted to go ahead and start with just asking people what their definition of GIPA is, whether somebody who was at the DC meeting wants to chime in and talk about what they think GIPA is. Anyone?
I'll go.
Clarence?
Yeah. My favorite, Andy, like when we did our interview, my favorite thing, I'll leave with, what was it, the training when they said nothing about us without us. And for me, GIPA is the involvement of people that are HIV positive in decision making when it comes to our care. Having a seat at the table.
Cool. Vanita, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Being decision makers in issues that affect us, or being the voice. Well-intentioned folks are well-intentioned, but clearly being the voice of on issues that impact positive folks.
Cool. So if you'll see, most basic, those are both great definitions, and it really shows the nuances in GIPA. But basically, the greater involvement of people with AIDS or people with HIV means two important things. The first is recognizing an important contribution that we can make in the epidemic, and the second one is creating a space within society for our involvement and active participation in all aspects of that response. So really, it's exactly what Clarence and Leah had said, nothing for us without us. And there's a picture of some of the HIV caucus members at a raffle. So the GIPA Pyramid. Basically, the GIPA Pyramid is a way of understanding how people with HIV are being involved in an initiative or in a project. So you can see various levels of involvement. So target audiences would be ways in which we're targeted for services, messages, those kinds of ideas. As contributors, we might be being asked to participate in some way. We might be asked to help frame the messages, but we're still being seen in a very supportive or a secondary way. When we get to speak, that's really, people asking us to speak for them, being able to speak, our voice, but for somebody else's agenda. So maybe you might be asked to talk about services, or the importance of health services someplace, but nobody asked you exactly what that would mean to you. Sometimes we're brought to conferences to share our views, but we're not really asked to participate in any other way. So as implementers, at that level, the implementers are really when we're asked to actually deliver the service. So sometimes we get hired to deliver that service. We don't have any say in what that service looks like. And that can be in a realm of health issues. As experts, we're being asked our input. So people are seeing us as experts that our lived experience matters, and that it's vital that that lived experience becomes part of framing a program, framing an initiative. As decision makers, which is the top of the pyramid, it's exactly what it means, is that we decide what's important for us, and we have the resources to make that happen. Resources can be people power, it can be resources, but really as a decision maker, those are those initiatives that come across your desk and say, this really doesn't sound good for my community. This doesn't sound cool for people living with HIV here, and we should not do this. Or we should do it, but alter it to make it more responsive to where our local needs are. So that's really how the pyramid works. And we're going to come back to the pyramid. I just wanted to give you an overview of it. Vanessa?
Hi. Yep. Thanks, Andy. I had to take my phone off of mute. Thanks, and thank you, Andy. We're now going to talk about the beginnings of the movement in the United States. And if you're not familiar, that started with the Denver Principles. A group of people met in Denver, Colorado, which is why it's called the Denver Principles. In the early part of the epidemic, a group of men came. Hear me? Okay, group of men came together and formed the Denver Principles, which basically is about the self-empowerment of people living with HIV in the United States. And out of this, early local groups formed in New York City, San Francisco, Denver, Kansas City, and Washington, D.C., and ultimately the National Association of People with AIDS formed out of this collective effort. There were also state and local coalitions, networks, advocacy, Buyers Club. Anybody see the Dallas Buyers Club? You don't have to respond because we don't have a lot of time, but it just reminded me of that at that moment. Support groups, which we don't have a lot of at time. Support groups were pretty strong in terms of ensuring that people felt connected to something. The history of our movement is the story of the synergy between people living with HIV and other people such as our allies, our friends, our supporters, our family, who coalesced around us to support the movement. Activist groups were often mixed zero status. So positive people and negative people working together. They formed certain organizations such as ACT UP, TAG, which is Treatment Advocacy Group, and countless other local groups that had significant HIV positive leadership. Thank you. Our history, I'm going to go back. Our history is one of sharing power and what happened as a result of our ability to share power. So you see these pictures here. The one that I really like the most is Silence Equals Death. I think that when I first went and found out about NAPWA and saw the principles and then did some more research and saw this symbol, that it really resonated with me in terms of that I wasn't alone out there and that there was a group of people that were fighting for their lives. Our urgency to advocate is focused around policy, funding, discrimination, research advocacy in the pharmaceutical companies, as we know, really led to the development of the treatments that we have today. and our advocacy, as the slide said, continues today on the street. We advocate for housing and economic justice for people living with HIV. We also have other groups such as the Positive Women's Network, USA, who did a advocacy around prevention at one of the national CDC conferences, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. We just held a landmark conference, a gathering in Grinnell, Iowa, the HIV Criminalization Conference, and you can see everybody there. And if you really, really look, you could see me right there, way to the left of your screen. Andy? Okay. There's Barb there, and Nana somewhere in there. But we'll keep going. You might recognize some of the folks in there. Now, we're just going to share some of the other ideas because I think this is important. The self-empowerment movement really started in the United States, but it took off all around the world. And if you Google the National Association of People with AIDS, you will see that different countries have organized around that label. For example, in Nairobi, Kenya, they are advocating to keep low-cost genetic medications available. And I say that word, but I'm going to say in Indonesia, they are advocating for generic medications as well, and a free trade agreement, against a free trade agreement that would jeopardize access to these medications. Also in India, they're advocating also against a free trade agreement. It seems like a lot of the global countries are advocating against certain provisions of the free trade agreement which would prevent them from accessing low-cost medications. In terms of support by allies, we lost him, but he was definitely a champion for people living with HIV, Nelson Mandela, who's the first president of South Africa. These are other institutions that come together composed of people living with HIV and HIV-positive, negative people who are working together. Maybe you know some of these groups. I'll just list a couple. AIDS Project Los Angeles, CMHC, of course, we mentioned them already. NAPWA, Fight Philadelphia just had a great conference on prevention and leadership among people living with HIV. So why are we having this webinar? Why are we even having this project, this positive organizing project? Because from 1983 until now, we have seen the lessening of people living with HIV involved in the pyramid, so to speak, that Andy presented. That at all levels of that pyramid, our visibility, our voice has lessened. And that's happened for a number of reasons, which we will probably get to in the next couple of questions. So, what happens when we have GIPA? That's a question for you all. We just talked about at the high point, which was 1983, and where we are today at 2014. It seems as though we're making a turn upwards again, especially with groups like PWN and Zero Project that did the Grinwall conference. But, we got a long ways to put that soil back where it's been eroded. So what do we lose if we don't regain that ground? Anybody want to answer that? Or in other words, what could happen if we don't have GIPA? You want me to continue? Does anybody have a response?
Well, I feel like if you lose GIPA, if you are losing the involvement of individuals living with HIV, it's hard to successfully do things without their proper input. I think it's important. That's kind of what Clarence said. Nothing about us without us. How are you going to do something for a population of people without their input? It just seems counterproductive. So that's my little comment.
That's a really good point, especially around policies and programs. Sometimes in the past, decisions have been made without us, and we've had to come back in and redirect the action. I know that in Washington, D.C., Barb Cardell, who's on the phone, gave a really good example, if you all remember, about what Colorado was doing in terms of their planning council actions there, and what the state was doing in terms of funding there and their involvement in how decisions were being made. So I think you really bring up a very good point. And also in terms of service delivery, if there's no input from the population, a service provider may not know that people need transportation to get to their building, and they build a program without transportation and wonder why people don't show.
Right. Yeah, so in order to find out what the root of some of the issues, the problems are, you must have the input of the population that you're trying to help.
I agree. Thank you for your response. Anyone else before we move on? How about what's one more? What else? What might we lose if we don't have GIPA?
Well, this is Anita. I guess without GIPA, clearly we use the benefits, we use the experiences of the last 30 years of people living with this disease and what we know has come to be true. Without their involvement, like you said, we wouldn't have the treatments that we have today. So who knows better on the ground are the experts. I like that, the highest in the decision making. Who knows best than the folks of us who are living with it? So losing the ground of those folks who came together in the 80s.
You know, there's an old adage, and everyone knows that if you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it. So I think that we have a rich history. We have a lot to learn from it, and a lot to add to it. So we're going to continue on with other reasons why we lose GIPA. There could be funding decreases, job descriptions that people are for.
I apologize. My dogs are fighting. I'm gonna.
Oh gosh, doggies.
They are protesting. They are protesting.
Like this video about what it's like to be on a conference call, and they do a conference call and like a person leaves the room, or there's somebody who's talking and it's all in real time. Somebody on this conference call, their dog is barking. Their dog is barking.
Well, we'll continue. They seem like they're back with us. People could be out of care. We talked about service delivery. Siloing of professional work versus volunteer work, mismatch between programs and community needs, and what we lose relationships that sustain the work. And a lot of times our relationships are grounded, as Vanita, you said, in our history. So I want to thank you both for making the comment. I'm going to turn this over now to Andy, who's going to talk about anti-oppression work.
So, apologies for the dog fight. Those are my dogs. Okay. So, wanted to talk about one of the things to think about is not just kind of the magic that happens by bringing people with HIV together. It's also about working against oppression and kind of social marginalization. And the reason that happens is there's lots of questions that we need to ask when we think about GG, and these are some of them, is when we're dealing with any kind of systemic issue, we have to ask questions. Who thrives and dies? Whose body matters? Whose history survives? Who gets policed? Who is safe? And who is missing? And when we talk about GIPA, we have to be clear that there are GIPA that happen externally, so that politicians or other people that are not part of the HIV community make decisions about our lives. So a good example of that would be, for instance, criminalization policies, where HIV is penalized, unlike other diseases, in the criminal system for this, allegedly for the fear of transmission, but it's never really about transmission, is it? Or when we think of things that happen, like the horrific murder of a woman in Texas recently, who disclosed her HIV status to her boyfriend and was murdered for it. When we think of that, whose body matters in that moment? Whose history matters? Does her history matter? Does his? She disclosed, which is considered a good thing, but, and I put that in air quotes, but there was a consequence to it. And whose narrative is allowed to be determined in the aftermath of that. So when we look at GIPA, we really need to ask those kinds of questions: is who is benefiting from this system and why? So some of those threats happen externally, like I was saying, and some of them happen inside of our community. So I talked with many of you already, and we talked about greater involvement of canines. Sorry, I'm just seeing some of the chat. And some of the things that happen internally. When I talked to you, you talked about kind of these long-standing communities of people living with HIV in your local communities, and some of them aren't as accessible as others, and some of them are not inclusive as others. I've been in a lot of tables where kind of old school doesn't want the new school in. And it doesn't have to be just young people. It can be anybody. HIV is a disease that gets transmitted at any part of your life. So it could be somebody who's recently diagnosed, somebody who's recently wants to get involved, and sometimes those tables, no one wants to open up the table for the new person. And so there's a problem when that happens. That's not really GIPA. Their involvement of people with HIV means all of us. It means even the people that make us uncomfortable. It means making sure that the systems that people need to participate are there. I've sat on many community planning groups where they only meet during the day between 9 and 5. And the problem with that is that some people work during the day, so they can't, and they don't work in an AIDS job, so they can't go to a community planning group meeting, or there's no child care provided. So how is a woman with children supposed to be able to participate if she doesn't have child care already? So these are questions that people need to ask when it's really about GIPA. Can people really get involved? And are there resources to support that? So how does that work? Often, if you think about Audrey Lorde, I don't know if you're familiar with their work, but, Black lesbian feminist poet from the 60s and 70s who passed away in the 80s from breast cancer. But Audrey Lorde wrote that the master schools will never dismantle the house. In that essay, she says that racism and homophobia are real conditions of all of our lives in this place and time. I urge each one of us here to reach out into that deep place of knowledge inside herself and to touch that terror and loathing of any difference that lives there. See whose face it wears. Then the personal as the political can begin to illuminate our choices. And I think a lot of the times when I walk away from the quote, I think the tools that I was given, whether through education or through being at these various jobs, aren't going to dismantle the system that it perpetuates. So, I was taught certain things. I was taught ways of being professional that may not be useful all the time, particularly if I just want to kick the table up and tell everyone they're full of shit, which I'm known to do. So I want to kind of get at how would an organization, how would a group or an organization really start to use GIPA? And I want to actually use as my example the Positive Women's Network. So this is a long statement about the Positive Women's Network USA, about their value statement. But one of the things I really want to focus on here is how did they come about this statement? And I'm not going to ask Anna how this happened. I'm going to instead take a step back and say that one of the things when I read this, I see very clearly that one of the key questions that PWN had to ask when it was defining itself was, who is a woman? Who is a woman living with HIV? And that seems like a very simple question, and it's not. So, and the reason why it's not is because of these issues that kind of come out of this value statement, is that they recognize the value of needing to counter homophobia, transphobia, racism, and classism, that they recognize the need for leadership amongst Black and Latino women, transgender women, sex workers, women who use drugs, women who are unstably housed, women in poverty, and women with an experience of incarceration. Now, why does that matter to state that? Do you think that these are women that would be involved in organization, in any other organization?
No.
Andy, you broke up. Could you repeat that?
Do you think that these are women? Why is it important? Why is it important to claim these women and to name these women and to say that their leadership is important? Would they be women that would normally you would expect to see them at the head of organizations or the head of a movement?
I think no. I think these women wouldn't have a voice initially, and I don't know if they would actually have the courage to kind of step up because of the background. And so I would say no.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that one of the values here of naming why this leadership is important is to be able to make sure that that space is there for these women. I think if we don't name these women, they don't get to be involved, or they don't think they should be involved. And I think the road towards their involvement is just a lot. The road is a lot rougher to get those women involved.
Absolutely.
So, in terms of an organizing ideology, one of the things that I will say is that the Positive Women's Network USA requires that anyone in a formal leadership role has to sign that statement. And so anybody who wants to be involved in PWN USA has to sign this statement, being able to say that they understand these things. So staff, board, regional organizers, all of them. So everyone has to stand up for these women's rights and their leadership, which is cool. So in terms of an organizing ideology, and many of you kind of in DC, we talked a lot back and forth about what kinds of ways that our projects are going to be developing with them.
And so can you tell me which states again are not doing insurance purchasing? I've got Mississippi, Arkansas, Texas.
I hear some other interference.
Let's see.
Have their phone muted.
I know, but I was waiting to hear what the answers were. Who doesn't have it? Sorry, I forgot the insurance question. Okay, so
can I interject for a second?
Sure.
I just wanted to let you guys know that Alicia is with me. She's been with me for like about 25 minutes, and I just kind of wanted to make sure that you guys knew that she was here.
Cool. Hey, Alicia.
Hi, how are you? How's everyone?
Pennsylvania, Texas, Idaho, Alabama, and North Carolina.
We're doing well.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
So when groups organize, there's two basic models: deficit-based and asset-based. In public health, we're used to deficit-based organizing. So what that means is often when you look at a grant or an initiative or request for proposals, often it's framed as a deficit-based model. What does this community lack that we can provide? So for instance, an example of that would be saying, Black, gay, and bisexual men have a higher rate of HIV in our area because they lack because they lack social support, they lack social services, they lack institutional structures. So that's one way of organizing, is to always say, like, what does this community not have? And another way of doing it is asset-based. So really looking at the strengths, the networks, the relationships, and institutions in the community that you can support and that could benefit from further growth. So if you look at the Positive Women's Network value statement, do we think that's asset-based or deficit-based?
Wow, it's looking at what we don't have, kind of like, is we want to make sure that we include them, but it's starting from a place that they're not there.
So it recognizes the structural challenges,
Yeah,
but is it passive language or active language?
oh, it's very active. Active language.
So that's one key, is that it's active. So it forces you to take action, right?
Yeah, but it's still, yeah, it does. But, you know, I guess it does a little twist because it's active even though it's recognizing what's lacking, but it's saying we will include them, but we know they're not there.
Mm-hmm. So, but when, so it's a bit of a combination. It does emphasize the strengths, right, in terms of leadership. It does emphasize kind of building leadership, that leadership is possible, right? It doesn't say people can't do it. It's basically a we can statement, right?
Right.
Almost all GIPA, in fact, all GIPA is an asset-based brand. So when you think of greater involvement of people with HIV, it's not like you sit around saying, oh, our life sucks because we all have HIV, even if it does. You say, oh, you don't sit around and go like, oh, because that's not really a fun party. That's not going to make a fun community organizing event. That's going to be sad Sally. So asset-based is more like, what is their strength? What can we get these groups of guys to do? What can we get these groups of women to do? So when I think of the work happening in, for instance, some of the stuff that happens in Babes in Seattle is very asset-based. These women have strengths. They're HIV-positive women living with HIV, doing work in the community, who are able to reach women and support women into getting services. And one of the key kind of moments for Babes is that Babes assume and insist that women living with HIV have a particular knowledge about that experience that is useful for other women living with HIV. And that is a clear asset-based approach. So one of the things that happens often in organizing is stigma, and it's a threat to the greater involvement of people with HIV in a very clear way. So stigma very quickly is a social process where some people are defined as other, labeled with negative characteristics, and excluded from meaningful participation in family, society, government, or other important institutions. So one of the things that happens is that people that don't have a stigmatized identity think that their identity is normal. So that if you're feeling some kind of way about the way you're being treated, people that aren't treated that way think that you're acting irrational, when in fact you are being treated differently, or that your participation is not being valued in the same way. So one of the things to keep in mind is that the things that other people say about people with that stigmatized group, you also hear it if you're part of that group. And so what happens is you may feel like one of the simple things around HIV, and we hear this a lot, is that people with HIV are promiscuous, are disease, we're dirty, that we're diseased, we're dirty, and that we're promiscuous. And one of the things that happens is sometimes in our communities, we'll think that about other people with HIV. So we'll think, well, I'm not like that, but those guys over there are. I remember when I first tested positive, somebody said to me, oh my God, are you an idiot? I thought you would just know better. And it was somebody else living with HIV, and I was like, all I did was have sex. That's all I did. There are worse things I could do today. And that kind of internal stigma works against GIPA. So one of to think about in all of your initiatives is to think about how you're involving people with HIV, but also to reduce the barriers and to make sure that even with kind of key PLHIV stakeholders at the table, you always have to make the table bigger. So it's not just about the people that are comfortable coming to the table. It's about all the people, or making table comfortable with everybody there. Vanessa?
Thanks. Thank you, Andy. Andy really shared some really specific examples of external and internal oppression and its impact on our ability to effectively and fully organize our communities. So I just want you to think about what he said, our earlier conversation about what we think GIPA is to us and to our community, and I'm going to ask you a series of questions and then ask you to respond to them. But right now, I don't want you to respond to each question. I want you to take each question in and just take a moment to think about how it might be impacting your life, your ability to organize for this project, and any past experiences you may have had being involved with our community. So the first question is, and we're asking you to close your eyes. So really take this seriously. If you are on mute and looking at your computer, that's fine. But we want you to close your eyes. The computer can stay in front of you, but just close your eyes for a moment. It's only going to take a few minutes. Thank you. So what would they have to do? Well, wait a minute. Let me start again. You've closed your eyes. You are imagining walking into a meeting in a group that has more social power than you do. The members of the group have more social power than you do. A meeting in which you have some vital, important things to say. What does that feel like? And this is for everybody, whether you're positive or negative. What would they have to do to make you feel comfortable? What are ways you have seen people become more comfortable and included? What do you need to do to make yourself feel like you belong or are able to share the vital things that you know with the group? So I've asked those questions. I'm going to give you like 30, 45 seconds just to reflect on those questions, and then I'm going to go through each of those questions, which probably is a scenario, and then we'll talk about it for a few minutes before I turn it back over to Andy. Some of you don't have your eyes closed. I can hear you talking. Okay, so I'm hoping you were able to participate in the exercise. And so remember, the scenario is that you are in a meeting where participants in the group might have more social power than you do. And you're in a meeting where you're at this meeting because you have something vital you want to say. So the first question is, what does it feel like when you're in a room where the perception is that the people in the room, and the reality sometimes, the people in the room have more social power than you do? What is that like for you? Does anybody want to respond? What has been your past experience with that?
And when you say they have more social power, I'm assuming you think because whatever, they've been at this longer or something. Is that what you mean? Or they seem to know more?
It could be that they're more experienced, or it could be about privilege. I know from my own experience when I first walked into the planning council meetings, it wasn't that I wasn't welcome. They acknowledged me, but it wasn't as if they were looking to me as a person living with HIV to be a full participant in the meeting. I mean, they had been together a long time, doctors, case managers, even long-term survivors living with HIV, and you know, they were in a role. They had a group rhythm going, and sometimes it's hard for a newcomer or someone who may have been there for a while just to be able to break through. I had a friend recently explain it to me as cliques. Sometimes these groups act as cliques. So, and I know when that's happened to me in the past, before I did my own work on myself, it would make me feel inadequate. I would get anxious or nervous. But I would be patient, and after a minute, it would pass. But a lot of times, that keeps people from coming back to the meeting.
You just described what I was going to answer. I thought that's what you meant, and yeah, it silences me in a way. It's a little intimidating. I don't know that initially my opinion is valid, or just kind of feel a little small at times when I walk into that kind of setting.
Yeah. So it could be very real. And so what would folks in that meeting have to do to make you feel comfortable? What has made you feel comfortable, Vanita? And then others, if you have responses, please join us.
First, people acknowledging me, or sometimes it's helped, or when there's been an open invitation to give some input or to get my opinion or ask a question that I felt that people really wanted an open response, or where they slow it down and say, does anybody not understand? Please, you feel like the meeting is for everybody, not those selected few, when they make gestures like that.
Yeah, that's very important to feel welcome and acknowledged. I agree. Are there any others? When you folks have gone into meetings, what has happened for you?
Well, not that I've went into like a meeting, but I just kind of wanted to chime in and respond to that question. When you first, I think I may have misheard you at first, because when you first asked the question or posed the question, I heard you to say that what would you need to do in order to make yourself feel more comfortable in that particular meeting when you walk in. And just now I kind of heard that what would the people in the meeting need to do. And my response was, initially, if I'm walking into a meeting of that particular sort and the positions or roles of power are different, for me, I would feel that it would be their responsibility to kind of make me feel more welcome, and that I didn't have to, or shouldn't have to anyway, do anything to kind of basically say that, to make myself feel more valid. For me, I think it would be that the people in that particular meeting who held that power would be, or should be, at a place to kind of welcome me in, maybe about opening the table or conversation with, oh, this is Clarence Peoples, he's here, he's new, and we're going to listen to what he has to say. From that particular standpoint, then I feel welcome and able to voice my opinion.
Hey, thank you, Clarence. Thank you for that clarification. I really appreciate it. I just want to ask you a follow-up question. So you have a colleague, a peer, who has gone to the meeting with you, and he may not be as self-empowered as you are, or she, and they don't want to go back. So what would you say to them?
I would first find out their reasons for not wanting to go back. Maybe somebody pulled them to the side or caught them in the hallway or in the bathroom and said something that was inappropriate. And so I'll first try to find out what their reasons were. And then if their reasons were something that we can just kind of talk about between the two of us, and I would encourage them to kind of go back into the meeting, because it's something that will be beneficial for me, my colleague, and the people that were in the room conducting the meeting.
The reason why I asked you to follow-up question is because peer support is one way that we know people become more comfortable and feel included. Are there any other ways that you think that we can make people feel more comfortable and included? We mentioned a couple. Let me give another example. I was at a meeting, and I didn't even realize I was making this person, a peer, feel welcome. They happened to sit next to me at a meeting. It was their first meeting. No one gave them a glossary of the terms that were going to be used in the room, so a lot of acronyms were being thrown around. And the person kept asking me, well, what does that mean? What does this mean? And we're in a meeting, so I'm having to work on two levels. One, to keep paying attention to what's being said in the meeting, but also to support this person in ensuring that they're able to stay up with what is going on. And I never gave it a second thought, like, oh, you're getting on my nerve or anything like that. I was like, okay, they're asking questions they want to know. That's great. And at the end of the meeting, they thanked me and said that no one ever took the time just to answer those questions so that they could stay in the room.
Right, absolutely. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that was a powerful experience for me because sometimes we do things and we don't even know that we've done it, and they have
Right.
made that person feel, part of the group. Are there any other? How about you folks who run meetings? What do you do other than bring food? That always helps me. Food is good.
I think it's a good idea usually to have either some sort of icebreaker or either some sort of meet and greet before the actual meeting gets started, and maybe once the meeting gets started, then kind of go around the room and have everyone to introduce themselves, maybe a little bit of background about themselves and, what brought them to the meeting, and just to kind of go around the room that way. That way people will feel more comfortable in speaking out and speaking up and speaking more when they feel like they're familiar with the other people that are in the room.
Suggestion. All the suggestions that you all have added have been great, and I'll just make one more comment before I turn it over back to Andy. The comment I'm going to make is for first-time meetings, that is an excellent idea. Even for long-term meetings, we could do this. For our council meetings that have been going on for 20 years, maybe we could convince them that every quarter they do what you suggested. So people get reacquainted, because sometimes we settle in like it's an old marriage, and we forget that there's some newness. There might be some people around us that we're forgetting about. So I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah.
Is there anything else? Oh, go ahead. Is there anything else that anyone else would like to share before we move on? The reason why we're having this discussion before I turn it over to Andy is because these are some of the things that you may have to do to get people to stay the long haul with your project. It's a lot of work, but I know you all know it's worth it, but we're not having this discussion just to because we have nothing else to do, and I really appreciate your participation, but also to remind you all that organizing people takes a lot of energy and effort, and these are just ways that might make our job easier. Right. So, Andy, I think I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Cool. I just wanted to, recognize that when you run meetings or participating, we all have a role, and I think that you all kind of hit on the head for how do you make it more accessible. I think one of the challenges is always being mindful about, the jargon that gets thrown in the air. I mean, in my day job, for instance, I teach a university professor, and I always have to remind students, we have a lot of graduate students from China, and I have to remind students that when they're talking and they're doing these kinds of, they say things that just don't exist in China, and they have to slow it down because it's not fair to the other students to really be able to, so that everyone can participate at an equal level. So something very simple like a sorority or fraternity, when students discuss that, I have to remind them that that doesn't exist in China. So they have to kind of find common ground. And I think that's a useful exercise when we do our organizing, is to always make sure there's common ground, so we're not just saying like the jargon or talking about, something that happened 20 years ago or 10 years ago. Be able to kind of keep things, the context fresh for people, and so that it's not so intimidating for new people. What I'd like to do is kind of refocus the pyramid discussion, really look at our project. So as you can see, our fabulous webinar developer went ahead and pulled pictures from all the various cities. We've got all 3 cities represented here. And I wanted you to kind of talk about, I know that you had an idea about your project. For some of you, that has been an evolution, that your projects are evolving. And I wanted to briefly ask you to describe where your project is right now, like what it is right now, in 1 or 2 lines, and we'll proceed to the next question. So, let's see. So Detroit, since that project has changed the least. Going on. What are y'all doing? And remember that some people on the line have never met you, weren't in DC, and aren't as familiar with your project. So if you could just describe what your project is.
Okay. Me, Alicia Buggs, and along with Clarence Peoples and Nikki Levinsky, we are on the Stigma Index project. And the Stigma Index project, what it is, it's the first time that it's being conducted here in the United States. It's been done in 50 states. And what it is a questionnaire that we are providing positive people relating to the stigma, the barriers, and discrimination that they face living with. And from that, from the research, depending on the data that we get from that, we're going to do a big advocacy push after the fact. Town hall meetings, getting the word out, getting the public here, especially in Metro Detroit, Michigan, and hopefully some of everywhere from here, since we are the pilot project, about the project and get people educated. And hopefully from the data we receive, hopefully maybe we can do something to hopefully change some laws about, criminalization or things of that nature. So that is, in a nutshell, what the Stigma project and Stigma Index project is all about here in Metro Detroit. And so we're the pilot project for the rest of North America.
Thanks, Alicia. Seattle or Houston? Anyone want to know?
This is Anita. Am I echoing? Okay, what the Houston, the Positive Organizing Project is about is we are training HIV positive individuals to become advocates and leaders in the HIV community, and so we are now, what we're doing is we're designing the organizing project to be run by and for positive people. So we're doing an advocacy training, leadership development, and then we'll go over a few and some community organizing topics, and then a few public policy issues. But we're using long-term community advocates who are HIV positive to train other folks who are HIV positive, our new generation advocates, we're calling them, to be involved in advocacy work in the HIV community here in Houston.
Cool. Seattle?
Yeah, so our project is working along two different tracks. So Trinisha is working more in the women's community and is putting together a survey, a sort of needs assessment for HIV positive women to identify gaps, particularly around level of comfort or familiarity around different advocacy skills and issues that the community feels needs more advocacy attention. And from there, we will then do some advocacy trainings and forums to then schedule some in-district visits with legislators so that members of the community can have more casual and a little bit longer meetings than we generally get in Olympia while session is going on, to really educate legislators around the issues that are identified in the survey, as well as just HIV and women more generally. And then on the other track, Solomon is working with the East African community, which sort of is facing which has just a higher level of stigma and silence really all around in terms of issues of HIV as well as LGBT issues. So what he's really interested in working on is really starting out the project with providing a safer space to discuss getting tested for HIV, what it means to be HIV positive, increasing the space to talk about LGBT issues as well. Sadly, there was a double murder in Seattle a few weeks ago, and they were both LGBT members of the community, one African American and one Somali. So that has sort of expedited the interest in terms of community forums and sort of using this tragedy as, in a way, an opportunity to sort of open up some more dialogue in the community around these issues. So we're getting those planned in partnership with some local East African ethnic media as well. Then sort of continue and go forward from there, likewise with advocacy trainings and scheduling meetings with local and state elected officials. And then both tracks will sort of dovetail in terms of lifelong participates or is a member of the Washington HIV/AIDS Community Advocacy Network, which is a statewide advocacy coalition that will host an advocacy day in Olympia in January. So we'll be working with both Trinisha and Solomon to reach out to the folks who've been engaged in both projects to attend that day in Olympia and and talk to their legislators again down there.
Wow, I'm sorry to hear about the double murder. That's terrible.
Yeah.
But exciting. All three of you have exciting projects. What I'd like you to think about is to really think about where the pyramid, the GIPA pyramid, your project is. Are people living with HIV? What part are people living with HIV participating? One of the things that I want to comment on is that often projects that are about community organizing, empowerment, they're dynamic, slow, they evolve, and they're meant to. One of the things that Nana said at a meeting in DC, which I take with me everywhere now, it's something I always throw on the table, is if the how is right, the what is right. And so really trusting the process to get you to the right answer, and really being able to say if there are people living with HIV at the table and it's a good number of people and it's good coverage of the kinds of populations we work with and people that really seem to get their communities, then what people decide to do or what comes out of those meetings is right, or is the right thing. I think it's the opposite way of thinking. I come out of a public health background. Public health, you always think, it's the end goal. You know, your logic model, and you think, that's my end goal. This is my problem statement, my end goal. And really, your focus is always on the outcome versus focusing on the process. And in GIPA, the challenge is focusing on the process. So with that in mind, in your various projects, where do you feel you fall in your GIPA pyramid? Has that changed? Has that changed since the inception of your POP project?
Yeah, well, for Houston, our project changed some because, the grant was written and it was designed to go out and educate people on ACA and, to make sure people stayed in care, get them educated and things. Now we went back to ACA is one of those policy issues we want to make sure people are aware of, but how do we empower and create a kind of advocacy movement of people living with HIV here? And so now the idea that the project will be run by and for positive people, so that now, I start off with because I went back to the community and did a focus group on long-term HIV advocates, and I tried to represent as much of the community as I could. There was a couple segments that weren't there, but I'm reaching out to them now to get them involved. And these are people who've been out there 20, 25 years and say, okay, this is your advocacy program. This is where I'm at. You guys tell me how should we do this for the Houston community? And they came through. Now they want to be mentors to these folks. I mean, they're going to be trainers. They are these long-term experts and who ultimately will helping me make some decisions about what to do next here. So I think they are my audience. They're my contributors. They're going to be my speakers and trainers. They're helping me implement. I mean, I think the goal is, I had a vision, but I didn't know how it was going to turn out. But they've just really are helping me, I think, go up and down this pyramid from the way I look at it now. But so it's been really, really eye-opening, and we didn't have someone from the transgender community
And today I have a meeting tomorrow with someone who's helping me to work some of that out, because we want to be as inclusive in what we need to do to make sure that we can get everyone involved, rather. So it's changed, but I think in a good way.
Fantastic, Anita. Thanks for sharing. And even with Anita's project, you see how originally it was written, and it was written with the good intent that
Right.
That this program that was designed to be people, and now that there are people with HIV involved in the implementation, it's changed, it's transformed, and that's amazing and that's great. So that people with HIV are now at all levels. So that's fantastic. Akila?
Hey, I would say that for us, I feel like we're moving through the levels of the pyramid as well, similar to Andy within public health, the social ecology of health model. I feel like we have definitely our experts, our implementors, our speakers, and we'll finally at the end, once we have our data and stuff, work with getting our decision makers on board. So I would definitely say I think we're moving throughout the different levels of the pyramid.
So one of the things that makes the Akila's project with the AIDS Project Michigan
you're
project,
breaking up.
Oh, sorry. One of the things that makes the Detroit project unique amongst all of them is that the original vision behind it actually came from people with HIV.
The original vision came behind, and then you were chopping again.
Came from people living with HIV.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's really unique and different, which is great.
Yes.
Yeah, that is so true. I didn't even think about it like that. This is Vanessa. Thanks for that comment.
Allison, where do you think the Seattle project fits?
Yeah, I would likewise say moving up the pyramid. I mean, I think certainly our two leaders within the project are the experts of the project and are key to implementing the projects and really working to get both of them, as well as the members of the community that they are engaging up to the decision maker level. Certainly to be engaged with decision makers, but to make them the decision makers themselves.
Fantastic. So, see that it's funny how, it's not fun. It's fantastic how everyone's project has evolved, and it's really kind of, as a goal, trying to make the tip of the pyramid. And part of our goal here is to get you all to kind of understand where your projects fit in GIPA and where we can to move forward. And with that being said, I wanted to talk about what our next steps were. So our next steps are everyone will continue. Well, the first next step, okay, I'm an evaluator, I can say this. The first next step is a link to an evaluation survey will be sent to you. To everyone registered, please fill it out. It should take just a few minutes. I think, Barb has a question. Let me just address the question first. When we talk about GIPA decision makers, trying to have HIV in the role of decision makers influence them. It's an excellent question.
Wait, not understanding the question. What was it?
So are we trying to have PLHIV in the role of decision makers, or do we want PLHIV to influence decision makers?
I think both. I want them as decision makers.
Yeah, I agree, Benita. I think that the key to PLHIV are decision makers on the projects that we're working on, that we initiate, we develop. It's an ideal, and obviously in public health it doesn't happen all the time. But I think that we have the option to, as you all said, is to keep on pushing towards that ideal and pushing towards the goals finding ways to make that work. So I hope that addresses that. So the first step after this webinar is over is to complete the survey. The second step is you'll continue working with your assigned trainer for support, for extra help, or for just sounding board. Those calls should be happening regularly. So as often as you feel necessary. People will be doing the site visits for September, so we should be doing initial site visits then, and just kind of, and we'll do a training then, and then there'll be a follow-up webinar and additional training specific to community organizing that we'll be doing to kind of help with the projects. So those are the next steps as far as I know, but now, have anything to add?
Andy, could you,
I don't.
when is the other webinar? Is that the 27th?
Next webinar would be, Nana, what's the timing on that?
I think it's the fall, right? October, November.
Yeah.
We're looking at October.
Okay.
We don't have a date confirmed yet.
Gotcha.
We'll hope you guys check if it'll work.
So you can see
The
that
only thing I
Nana,
want. Go ahead, Andy.
the Nana put up the evaluation link inside the chat if you wanted to see that. Vanessa?
Oh, I was just going to make the comment that all the sites will have had their site visits by the end of August, mid-September. So that's why I was saying the webinar was going to come after that, but you guys had answered the question already. Thank you.
Gotcha. Thanks, guys.
Thank you all. Any other questions people have?
Nope, thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great week. I hope you all have fantastic weather.
Okay.
Thank you, Andy.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.